make a start because we've only got an hour. So welcome everyone to this SEN Fringe event entitled Using AI to Reach Net Zero, Shortcut or Short Circuit. My name's Sam Hall, I'm the Director of the Conservative Environment Network. For those of you who don't know, the Conservative Environment Network is the independent forum for Conservatives in the UK and around the world who support net zero, nature restoration and resource security. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors for this panel, Smart Energy GB, who've made it possible. Thank you very much for partnering with us on this. Briefly to introduce the format, so we've got an hour as I mentioned earlier. We're going to start off with short contributions from each of our four excellent speakers who are going to send out some opening remarks on the topic. We'll then go to a question and answer session with the audience to take up the rest of the time. So please be thinking whilst the panelists are speaking of any questions that you have. Briefly to introduce the topic before we come to our speakers. So technological innovation is critical to net zero if we want to reach it in a pro-growth way without curtailing lifestyles with minimal disruption for people and for businesses. I think there are particular opportunities around technical innovation in artificial intelligence, which is the topic of today's panel events, if we want to build smart energy systems that are cheaper and more convenient. And some of these technologies that we'll need to reach net zero that use AI, just to list some of them now and to maybe set up some of the issues that we might get into. Smart meters is one of them. They can unlock cheaper tariffs for people during periods of low electricity demand, and they can connect up to smart appliances in people's households, enabling us to shift non-essential demand to times when electricity is cheaper and the pressure on the grid is lower. Electric vehicles are going to increasingly become autonomous, self-driving vehicles, but obviously that poses some interesting ethical challenges which we'll no doubt get into. Artificial intelligence can be applied in the sphere of agriculture and food production as well through precision agriculture and the use of AI to target application of inputs like pesticides and fertilizers. But I think all of these technologies will pose sort of similar sets of questions around data privacy, around the affordability of some of these technologies for households, around what the right regulatory framework is so that we can encourage and incentivize this innovation in technology which will make net zero cheaper, but also providing the safeguards. And also what are the potential for UK businesses to benefit from these technologies and the growth and export opportunities that we could get from really grasping these technologies. So lots of issues to get stuck into, I think, in the panel, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. So I'll introduce each of our speakers in turn. So firstly, I'd like to start with Dan Brooke, who's the Chief Executive of Smart Energy GB and formerly the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for Channel 4. So Dan, hand over to you for your opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Sam. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. We are the consumer engagement body for the smart meter rollout in the UK, and why don't I just explain a bit of the background to that, and then I'll talk about how smart meter data and AI is a fundamental part of helping the country reach net zero, and also energy security, by the by. So in the UK, the smart meter rollout is voluntary and industry delivered. So we exist to ensure that there aren't as many marketing and communication campaigns stimulating demand and talking about the benefits of smart meters as there are energy retailers in the UK. We are entirely funded by energy suppliers, energy retailers, and fully accountable to them. You probably know the most public of our activities is adverts with Einstein talking about the benefits of smart meters. We also do a lot of work that's less visible with customers in vulnerable circumstances, for example, ensuring that they don't get left behind with the smart meter rollout. 52% of homes have a smart meter now, and we know through statistical analysis, AI enabled, in fact, as it happens, that a bit more than 50% of any installation can be derived back to our activities, so we are having an effect. And the smart meters are, they're coming into their own now, particularly because they are one thing that every home in the country can do to monitor their energy usage through your in-home display, which gives you almost near real-time data of what you're using in your home. And if you use that to manage your energy in a different way and save energy and in turn save money, you can on average get a saving of about £50 to £100 on your household bill on the current typical, we know to call it that now, tariff. So it's not a silver bullet, but it every bit helps. The other thing that smart meters do, I mean, as Sam was saying, they're vital to the long-term goal of getting to net zero, but also energy security. Why? Because both of those involve the growth of wind and solar, which are both renewable, net zero, and homegrown energy security. Obviously, the great thing about renewables is they're abundant and they're cheap, but they're also intermittent. So the reduction in reliability of supply means you have to take a more active attitude towards the management of demand. And that's where smart meter data in two ways is particularly helpful, coupled with AI. Information from smart meters from millions of homes all over the country on a near real-time basis allows the grid to distribute energy around the system more efficiently, much in the same way that sat-nav works. And as we all know, the more users there are on sat-nav, the more efficient the distribution of traffic over the road network. So you can see how that analogy would work in energy. But also, smart meters enable the use of time-of-use tariffs, which Sam mentioned. So the way that works is the cost of generating electricity changes at different times of day, and with a time-of-use tariff, the benefit of that can be passed on to the consumer. I'm on a time-of-use tariff. I pay a different rate depending on which time of day I use energy. So I can trade convenience of when I use energy for a lower price, which has a benefit to me, but it also has a benefit to the system of flattening out demand, not flattening, but having a greater effect on flattening out of demand over the network. And, the best example probably of this at the moment is EVs. Via an app on my phone, which is AI and machine learning enabled, I can program my smart charger to charge my electric car overnight when electricity is at its cheapest. It'll give me exactly the amount of energy I need by the time of day I need it, and that will enable me to go about my business driving during the day. But it's also a battery that is effectively sitting on wheels alongside my house, which, because of the reverse polarity on your, on your schnozzle, enables you to use that energy when it's much more expensive at another time of day. So you can use the energy from your car to effectively boil your kettle in the middle of Coronation Street when electricity is most expensive. In addition, as has been done in some of the trials, you can then take the electricity from your car battery and put it back into the grid and receive a higher price than you paid for it downloading it in the middle of the night. So as well as smart meters and AI and machine learning being a fundamental part of the delivery of net zero and energy security, also, I think, in time, going to be a fantastic entrepreneurial opportunity for consumers. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Dan, for those opening comments and setting out some of the benefits that the smart meter rollout will realise for consumers and for wider society. I'd now like to turn to Pierre Andrews, who's the co-director of Digital Tories and is also working as a consultant for Flint Global. So thank you very much for joining today, Pierre. Over to you.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. So yes, my name's Pierre. During my day job, I work at Flint Global, a consultancy which provides strategic advice to all manner of businesses, and I particularly focus on telecommunications, digital and broadcasting sectors. But during my spare time, I've helped set up and run an organisation called Digital Tories, and we seek to discuss and debate issues of tech policy within the Conservative Party to raise awareness of big questions like, so for example, at this conference we've been talking a lot about online safety, competition in digital markets, or more traditional, the interaction between traditional media and the new internet way that the new ways that consumers access news online. But I won't pretend to be a policy specialist specifically on this sector, but I mean this has also been one of the biggest topics, I think, at different points of this conference, because I was at a polling event yesterday, and it revealed that whilst obviously there's a lot of movement in citizen support for different policies, there is still overall support for achieving net zero across the country, and that is both in what we'd call blue wall seats or red wall seats. There have been attempts, but there is no, it appears, appetite to buy into ideological campaigns against reaching net zero within the general population. To me anyway, it appears that the onus would be on the Conservative government to carry through measures in a way that promotes Conservative values, those being allowing the free market to develop those first and foremost, and for us to facilitate that rather than hinder it. The Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said a few words on this also, and I thought it was interesting. He said that whenever our country historically has found a particular source of energy to decline, it's always found something different, again, through the free market. He gave the example, I did understand the link afterwards, but that apparently most British ships in the Battle of Trafalgar were built from US wood because we'd exhausted our supply. And I thought that was quite an interesting parallel. But the point of that being that it seems that the replacement that we're having to find right now is really a mix of different energy supplies, both looking for sustainable and renewable sources, but also looking for transitionary fuels, such as shale or gas in the North Sea. And so we are going to need to develop quite fast tools that allow us to make sure that consumers of energy can get those different sources in a way that doesn't disrupt their constant supply. And that's where artificial intelligence comes in, because you have things like smart meters and multimodal networks that will allow you to, if, for example, your energy supply from a particular source isn't doing particularly well that day, so, for example, say it's not been very windy, then you might be able to transfer onto something, another supply almost immediately. There is then, I guess, a similar question, though, in that if those tools are facilitated and hosted and facilitated by artificial intelligence algorithms, then there is a big question around the world, really, as to how do we regulate artificial intelligence. I was speaking to some people yesterday from some researchers at the London School of Economics who were saying that, who were explaining to me, this hadn't been on my radar, but the EU is currently seeking to push forward some rules, for example, that will ban what you call social crediting. This goes on in China, depending on your behavior and how well the Chinese government thinks that you've behaved. Artificial intelligence will basically score you and either reward you or penalize you. So, for example, you won't be able to travel around for work, or you won't be able to put your children in particular schools. And I've realized that's a bit removed from this subject matter, but it does draw us to the necessity, I think, of finding some sort of regulatory framework that means that artificial intelligence doesn't, that whatever we do come up with is something that at the same time facilitates businesses to bring loads of wonderful new tools that will facilitate our energy consumption in this new multimodal way, but that at the same time won't punish us if we're not seen to be consuming in the right way, I guess.
Great, thanks very much, Pierre, for sort of situating some of these technological debates within that sort of broader conservative approach to net zero and where AI fits into that. And it's also great to be working with other conservative pressure groups in the conservative movement on issues of common interest. It's great to have you on the panel today. I'd now like to turn to our next speaker, Saqib Bhatti, who's the MP for Meriden, a member of the Sen Caucus, and recently appointed Vice Chairman of CCHQ for Business. Yeah. Have I got that right? Yeah. Thank you very much, Saqib, for joining us, and over to you.
Well, no, thank you, Sam, and thanks everybody for turning out for what is going to be a really interesting debate and discussion today, I think. Sam's right, I'm part of the Sen Caucus, and I have been since the day I joined Parliament. It is something, what Sen stands for is something that's very close to my heart. It's incredibly important. I know I'm probably preaching to the converted here today when I talk about how I fundamentally believe that we have a moral responsibility as Conservatives to deal with environmental issues in a way that not only deals with the issues of climate change and having net zero policies, but also taking people with us, and whether you're in a blue wall seat or a red wall seat, actually making sure that we get the message out there that this is a issue that affects each and every one of us. And I think as they say, a week is a long time in politics, but as things have progressed, since I've come into Parliament, and by the way, 24 hours is a very long time in politics. But the reality is that the way we've faced a number of different challenges since 2019, right? And as things have been thrown at us, it's really intriguing to see how the conversation shifts around climate change and net zero. And I say that in the context of COVID, for example. For me, this issue, apart from there being a moral responsibility to be to get this right, there's also a political imperative. Here, where I'm pleased to have the leader of my council here and the Environment Cabinet member, we in Solihull are, I would say, leaders, certainly in this region, if not in the country, in terms of getting a step ahead in terms of getting net zero. We're committed to having net zero ambitions across our borough. But there's a political imperative to do so as well, because there are shifts in attitudes. There are, you've got a lot more young people. It's one of the top, when you look at polling, it's one of the top issues that young people refer to. We've got a Green Party opposition, and actually, I remember in COVID, I've got Birmingham Airport in my constituency, and I remember in COVID, the leader of the Green Party was always talking about how we must learn from the fact, when the aeroplanes weren't flying, we must learn from that, and we should see how we can take that into the future. Now, I can't think of anything more disastrous from an economic point of view. I mean, it creates tens of thousands of jobs, Birmingham Airport does. But what I was, from a Conservative point of view, we've encouraged them to be in a position where they are also committed to being net zero by, I think, 2043. In fact, they may have shortened that time as well. So we are the grown-ups in the room when it comes to this debate and this conversation. And of course, the importance of AI and technology is absolutely core to that argument. I mean, when it comes to innovation, the creation of technology, it does allow us to make a free market argument about AI and how we can tackle climate change through innovative means. And it means that when you have the extremist Green Party policies, you've got sensible opportunities that mean we can take people with us. Because some of us may feel that there's a moral imperative, but there are certainly those people who will say, well, actually, it disadvantages us. For example, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, maybe it's putting too much of an expense on people's household bills. And it is for us and each and every one of us in this room to make the argument that actually there's an opportunity here around job creation, around skilling for the future, around making sure that we are global competitors. It's not just about the region, it's also about the globe, and we are leaders in that. And when it comes to AI, let's have this conversation in 10, 15 years' time and look back at this, because I think we all have made absolute massive strides. We're in the field of AI alone, not just in net zero and climate change. There are all sorts of technological advances coming together. But we now know that actually, when you get AI right, of course, there's ethical issues, which I'm sure we'll talk about during this debate. When you get those things right, we could probably unleash a new global industrial revolution around that. And I genuinely believe that in the home of the industrial revolution here. And well, I mean, by the way, I should probably say, I don't know if other colleagues have said this, but we as a party have a very good track record when it comes to the environment. I gave my maiden speech, but it seems like a lifetime ago now, but in 2021 on the second reading of the Environment Bill, which is now the Environment Act. It's a world-leading piece of legislation. In fact, I think it was a Sen event I attended at COP26, where I was talking to members of Parliament from across the world. And it was so telling how far ahead we are when it comes to our understanding of how to address the environment and our attitudes. And so while I know I'm preaching to the converted in this room, it is imperative on all of us to go out there and make sure that we are taking people with us, because if we don't, if we lose that argument, it's our future generations who won't be thanking us. But I'm sure we'll have much more positive contributions. And but I look forward to having this debate today.
Great, thanks very much, Saqib. And yeah, and I can completely agree with that. And I think, yeah, technology does offer a really key way to help bring people with us on this transition, people who are more sceptical perhaps and less signed up to the environmental imperative. Turning now to our final speaker, Laura Sands, who's the CEO of Challenging Ideas. You also chaired the Government Energy Digitalisation Taskforce, and a few years ago was a Sen parliamentary supporter when you were an MP for South Thanet as well. So yeah, great to have you back on the Sen panel. Laura, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sam, and thank you so much for all the contributions. Really, really interesting. And I totally agree that actually what we have here in front of us, a massive challenge when it comes to net zero, but a huge decarbonisation dividend, which is there sitting in front of us. And what we've got to do is to understand how to shape that, how, quite rightly, to take people on the journey, but also to understand the technological advances that we can make and actually have global leadership. So I talk a lot about this decarbonisation dividend. And the first element of it is the modernisation of our energy system. So just to bore you all, I'm an energy geek, all right? So, so the energy sector is incredibly old-fashioned in many ways. And as, was being talked about before, when you start to think about all these EV cars, all this connectivity onto this system, which has always been a hose pipe. So the energy sector comes from production and it hoses the customer, right? We've now got a new system, which is going to be the interaction of demand and supply, a perfect market configuration. Currently, we've got 400 people who run the energy sector, and they all know each other's golf handicap, which is most convenient. We will have, with EV cars on this system, 100 million actions and assets interacting with the energy sector. This is an enormously complex system design. And to do that, if we want to do it as we do today, which somebody rings up and says, hello, Johnny, can you ramp up to every EV car in the West Midlands, the whole system is going to collapse. So in many ways, data and digitalisation is going to become an integral part of the energy infrastructure to actually unlock these assets, because they have huge value and huge value to consumers, because as Dan rightly says, we're absolutely an opportunity for us to, in many ways, create value for us, money for consumers, but secondly, for system stability. So we've been involved in the Data and Digitalisation Taskforce, and there were sort of three key elements to it, and I'll come on to sort of AI. The first thing is that we needed to open up data. Now, in the energy sector, again, really far behind other sectors. We need to learn from other sectors. So we're probably about 25 years behind the food sector, the digital sector, the mobile phone sector. So we've talked about data being presumed open. That everyone thinks their data is really valuable. But in a system, actually, their data is so much more valuable when they share it. So that was very much a thing. And at the moment, energy data is something I would define as, I think it's a technical term, it's called crap. It's in a really, really bad state, but we need to unlock that. The second is something called a digital spine, which every other sector, the logistics sector, the food sector, everyone, but the energy sector doesn't have it. And this is really prices to devices. So to unlock that value, an offshore wind farm being able to have visibility of an EV car. Now, not directly, but that you've got a very, very thin digital layer, the HTML of energy, right? So that digital spine is another of our recommendations. BEIS has taken this on board. The government is really behind all this modernisation. The last thing, which is absolutely crucial and comes to the AI point, and that is we have to get consumer consent. Currently, consumer consent is pretty random, it is not empowering, it does not give control to consumers. And so there's going to be the development of a consumer consent, in many ways, format that all consumers can sign into, and that then unlocks all of that value. And anybody who goes to Estonia, Estonia is the poster person for everything digital. My very last point is around AI. And I find it very interesting because I think people sort of say, oh, we need data and digitalization and artificial intelligence. They're merely functions, right? And so AI is only, an algorithm is only of interest if you have given it a clear task, if you've designed it around an outcome, and those are the difficult things, is to work out what the task is, what the outcome is, and that what the governance structure is around inclusion and consumer protection. And so in many ways, we do need, and in our report in energy, but actually this is economy-wide, we need to absolutely bottom out what this governance structure looks like, because what you put into an algorithm is what you get out, but it's the input and the output that is really important. The algorithm is merely a function.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. Yeah, really, really interesting and set out quite a few of the issues there. So it's time for the question and answer session. If you hold on to your questions for a minute, I'm going to abuse my chair's prerogative and put a couple of questions of my own to the panel. But do keep your hands ready to shoot up, and others be thinking of questions as well. We'll come to you very shortly. I wanted to turn first to Dan and to ask you about the impact of the current energy bill crisis on smart meter uptake. You had quite an interesting statistic in your talk about 52% of homes now have smart meters. Have you seen a big uptick in that in recent months as people's energy bills have gone up and people have wanted to see, I suppose, yeah, their energy consumption in real time and being able to manage their energy demand? Has that been a positive trend in terms of uptake for smart meters, and what will be the kind of long-term implications of that?
It's a good question. The answer is a mix. So. And it's a mix because, unfortunately, people don't always behave rationally. They sometimes behave irrationally. So, you know, rationally, it is good for you to probably to have an accurate bill, to be able to have a device where you can monitor your energy usage and, like I was saying, make savings. But people are so anxious about anything changing that will cause their finances to be worse. However, you know, irrational that may be, given that smart meters pretty much guarantee an accurate bill. So there are a lot of people who, you know, many people are in crisis mode, or going, I don't want any changes to anything that I don't know and I can't see, for fear that that is going to somehow make my life worse. So, yeah. But I think as the energy crisis hopefully some point recedes, you know, I think that there will have been a lot of education that has been successful about smart meters in the process, and the run rate will tick up even further after that.
Thank you very much. Pierre, now turning to you, you're saying you've been involved in sort of wider discussions on data and technology at this Conservative Party conference and discussing some of the online privacy issues. Are there any kind of lessons that you would like to draw out from some of those debates and how we might apply them in the sort of smart energy space? Are there any kind of read across from some of those wider discussions, and, you know, how can we avoid making any of those potential mistakes in the sort of use of data in the net zero mission?
I mean, I guess it's sort of the same thing as other panelists were saying earlier. The question of consent is probably the most important, in the sense that, as we've seen around the debate around the online safety bill, I don't think anyone in here would disagree with the fact that we need to protect the mental health and physical health, indeed, of children that might be impacted because of what they see online. And yet, because it seems that the debate has drawn on for so long, for 5 years now, that has exposed cracks that could have possibly been foreseen, but in any case now are sort of making us wait even longer. And I think are just, in general, concerning citizens about, you know, what they will be able to see online once this legislation happens. But I guess to draw a parallel with that for this topic, it would... The point you were making about, as I was saying, the other countries around the world are already doing this and are making, and when I say other countries, I'm saying authoritarian countries are using artificial intelligence systems to police their own citizens now. And I'm not saying that this is at all the direction we're going in here, but the fear of Big Brother also applies to the fear of Little Brother, the fear of big corporations, and what they might do with your data, because it is incredibly valuable to them. And so I think if you're able to explain that it will make your life easier, it will make your energy consumption better, and it will also help save the planet at the same time, then that will work fine. But it's probably going to be, that is a massive public information exercise that needs to be happening right now, I guess.
Great. Saqib, you were talking about how green your constituency is and the sort of passion for environmental issues of some of your constituents. What is the sort of, from your experience, I don't know that this is something that comes up a lot in the correspondence you get from your constituents, but what is the kind of acceptability of some of these technologies that we're talking about today among your constituents? Are they sort of excited about smart meters? Or is it an issue that you get complaints about? What's the general mood from the ground in terms of these technologies?
Well, first of all, I'm going to admit I'm one of those hopefully rational people. I've just bought a property, so I've moved into it, and I'm moving on to a smart meter at the moment. We're just trying to find a date in the diary, because I want accurate bills. But I will say this on that, just my mother, I was telling her about it, so it's absolutely worth doing. And she came up with the myth, oh well, your data's not safe when you come with smart meters, and it just brings home when you have those conversations. By the way, if you know my mum, please don't tell her I out. But
it's on camera.
Yeah, it's on camera. Oh God, right. But the thing is, she is. It just brings home the kind of myths that are out there that people latch themselves onto. But inevitably, when you've got this kind of crisis around rising energy costs, the whole, not just smart meters, but the focus on how energy is derived, what we do, this kind of conversation about energy infrastructure and governance, it becomes very much into the fore. But to answer your question, Sam, I think the reason I spoke earlier about putting the arguments out there and combating the counter arguments from other parties, the fact of the matter is we cannot be complacent in this, because the moment people, when the economy starts to be at the forefront of everyone's mind, and you're starting to look at how much money you've got in your pocket, you will naturally start to look at, you'll be suspicious of change. You'll start to think about what are the things that are gonna maybe impact whether I have a job in the future, because have I got the right skills if you've got new industry? That is where it falls upon all of us, not just the caucuses, the members of parliament, the companies, to make sure that we are educating people first of all, and making sure that they understand how the system is changing. Skilling is a massively important thing. We're in the home of the automotive industry. Just on the border of my constituency is Jaguar Land Rover, and I remember a conversation I had with them when we were talking about not having new diesel engine cars, and how worried they were. But almost instantly, once the announcement got made, within weeks we were having a meeting about how they're shifting over to greater electric vehicle production, greater conversation around having a gigafactory, which is absolutely essential to the survival of the automotive industry. And we're working with Ian Courts, the leader of the council, Andy Street, our mayor, to make sure that we get a gigafactory in close proximity, because proximity is everything in that. And so that's why it's really important that we fight for those jobs, because inevitably when you have technological change, like we did in the Industrial Revolution, you will see a shift in working practices. There'll be an attrition of jobs. It's our responsibility to make sure we create more. And that's why I talked about the global aspect of it as well, because we need to be able to be number one in that race, and then exporting those jobs. Because otherwise, autocratic countries like China will dominate that sphere. They will set the standard, and we absolutely, just for the interest of democracy and personal liberty, we can't allow that to happen.
Yeah, I quite agree. Laura, now turning to you, as you described, there's a lot of change going on in this space, and we're moving from a very old-fashioned energy system to a new one. You've obviously done this review for the government on energy data. How are you confident that the government is moving along with the pace of technological change? Are we implementing your recommendations at fast enough pace? Is the regulatory system keeping pace essentially to manage all these different challenges?
Well, while I started off being a little bit disparaging about energy and data and all the rest of it, we are actually world leading on how we're building this digitalized energy system. And I mean, nothing to do with me, but strangely enough, both our Taskforce recommendations have all been fully adopted by both BEIS and Ofgem. Regulations have changed for all our distribution networks. Presumed open data for energy system data has been employed. And we are being profiled in the International Energy Agency and with World Economic Forum as having the most advanced strategy, and that is starting to be implemented. There are competitions going out at this moment from BEIS, so I think we'll be at the forefront, and this absolutely builds a very interesting mix between our digital skills. I'm sure there are lots of people here in the digital world, but not in the energy world, and the energy world, which is full of wonderful engineers. And what is interesting, actually, is the cultural difference between a digital person meeting an engineer, and particularly an engineer and an economist. That is something else. And actually, a lot of this is about cultural clash. So an engineer says, I've got this fantastic piece of infrastructure. It's going to last 25 years. I've tested it to destruction. It will work forever. The digital person says, well, I've got an idea, and I think if it moves along, and then what I'd like to do is pivot it, and it might fail, and the engineer is going, oh my God, what's going on here? So we still have a sector that is very engineering-led, which is not a bad thing. But we need to understand that modernization, the optimization, and the delivery of net zero is only going to be delivered by really embedding digitalization and data and the skills, quite rightly, that go with it. So I would say to the energy sector, you need to recruit from outside your sector to get an understanding of what really is needed.
Yeah, good point on skills at the end there as well. Yeah, that's something we should pick up on, I'm sure, in the questions. Great. Now over to you. So please put your hands up. Gosh, lots of hands. We'll take them in batches of 3, given there's so much interest there. Yeah, let's start on this side, Lindsay, given you're here you go, with the gentleman at the front.
Thank you very much. So, oh, sorry, of course. Sorry, my name's Jake Scott. Thank you very much. This is really, really, really interesting. So my family are farming families, and it was mentioned right at the beginning with Sam saying that obviously AI and energy and environment is very much connected to farming. And as far as I can tell, it wasn't really elaborated on. So I just kind of want to know what AI technology is there out there to really not only help farmers, but importantly to kind of make some important strides. Because, for example, when we worked on the farm about 5-6 years ago, one of the really small, sort of like low-level versions of AI was being able to draw perfectly straight lines in the way we ploughed the fields. And that increases yield by like 20%. It might sound like, you know, it's a small thing, but it's huge in terms of the outcome. What other technologies are being worked on at the moment, and what sort of things are there out there to support farmers in that regard? Thank you.
Great question, yeah, and good for reminding us to pick up on that. Yeah, the gentleman there in the blue jacket.
Thank you. You just touched on electric cars. Now, there was a recent report in our wonderful media last week that the cost of an electric car compared to a petrol car it's got much smaller. In other words, it's not almost as beneficial as it was in, say, 2 years ago. Where do you think this is going? Do you think this is a trend, or do you think ultimately the electric car will be the main player in the far as automobile side of things is concerned? Because obviously we want more people to buy these cars, but if they see it's not cost effective, how are we going to get around that?
Great, and then we'll do one more. Yeah, maybe the gentleman. Yeah, you pick, Lindsay.
Thank you. I live in the New Forest. I'm a local councillor there. I'm also an end user of smart meters. I've got solar panels and an electric car. So a couple of points on the smart meters. Rural areas still haven't got the connectivity. So I've got a friend who's got a lot of panels going in and can't do anything to the grid because she can't have a smart meter. The other point is, I think if you want the consumer on your side, they've got to be smart in that they've got to tell us, because my experience of smart meters is they ain't very smart. First question I had was, what type of smart meter have you got? Well, I don't know. It sits in the garage and it never says anything to me. Apart from the little machine inside the house, which goes red and other colours at various times, and I don't know how to work that because I've got grey hair. Then I had to overcome the wonderful bureaucracy of the energy companies to try to complete a form so that I could feed energy in and be paid for it, a mere pittance I had. But there are words and acronyms there that I've never heard of, trying to get my money back. And then you go out to the garage, to the smart meter, and there is an array of buttons and menus which the average person is never going to understand. So how are we going to make our smart meters smart?
Very good question, yeah. I know Dan will want to come in on that, but let's go back to the first question, if I may, on farming. I think, Pierre, you were keen to come in on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's quite a very good question, because it reminds us also that when we're talking about the use of AI to help reach net zero, we're not just talking about how households will consume it, but also businesses. And there are three particular applications, I think. One is a general one, but two that are could be quite specific to the farming sector. The first one is that AI, and as we're moving towards a system where our energy sources become more mixed, AI will help us, could help, for example, a farm when its main energy source supply goes down. So like I was saying, for example, when it's less windy, or when, for example, it hasn't been very sunny where your solar panels are, then it will be able to automatically, for example, start hydrogen cells that are in another part of the network, so to sort of counterbalance that lack. But that brings me on, I guess, to the second point, which is that as well as smart meters, you also have smart grids that are being developed. And those mean that it's no longer just a direct relation between the energy supplier and the consumer. You're all loads of different energy consumers in the network, where if, for example, if you have a very sunny day, for example, if your parents on their farm had solar panels, they had a very sunny day, they'd be able to use up what they gained that day, and if they had anything left, they'd be able to sell it directly to one of their neighbours. And obviously, with the amount of land available, that could be quite an interesting application there for farming. The third one, and this is very specific to farming, I was reading up the other day about the development of vertical farming, and I realised that's not probably directly applicable to existing farms, but it does demonstrate. The principle, you have basically towers of plants that are individually planted in little sort of cups, and AI allows you to basically monitor in real time and adjust the temperature and humidity settings. So, for example, you could have one rack that is 40% humidity and the one right below 50%. And those are, I guess, the sort of technological developments that really could help in the agricultural sector.
Great. Next is the EV question. I just wanted to say a quick factual point that what has happened in the last few months is we've seen the cost of petrol and diesel come down as global oil prices have fallen, whereas electricity prices have obviously gone up because the marginal unit of electricity generation is gas, and gas prices have remained very high. So we are seeing, the cost benefit of EVs versus petrol and diesel cars, it is narrowing a bit. I think it is still, if you're home charging, cheaper to charge up an EV for now, but yeah, obviously these big global energy markets are driving a lot of that trend. I think the broad point though is that the technology is cheaper, and the electric engine is much more efficient than a combustion engine. But I don't know that, Saqib, you wanted to come in on that, because I know your EVs are a very big interest, and you talked about gigafactories earlier.
Yeah, well, actually, I read similar articles about that, and I remember thinking it's very worrying because actually the trend will then mean that, if you are thinking with how much money there's in your pocket, you will look at that and think, actually, if it costs as much. Sam is, I haven't checked his facts, but I know I'm sure he's completely right. But it's also about the emotional understanding of what's happening, and people need to be emotionally secure that cost there. Look, just on the broader, I guess, energy issues, I'm sure there's been lots of commentary on this. Am I worried in the short term? Yes, I am, because of course we're seeing the energy prices go up. All our bills have gone up, and if you are in a vulnerable economic situation, clearly that's going to have an impact, which is why the government has had to do all the significant interventions it has, and I'll leave the debate around that to another time. But am I worried about the medium or long term? Less so, because I think ultimately it does come down to the energy mix. So we've gone up to, I think, about 42% in terms of our renewable energy from renewable production. I mean, I think it was at 3% 10 years ago. So from 2010, I think that analysis was there. So we've done a significant shift in terms of our renewable energy. We're talking about nuclear reactors. We're talking about having more different generation of electricity, and I think that ultimately that will come down. And I think if you then take that into conjunction with the advent of AI, the government's strategic support that is giving, and that kind of idea that your car is its own power plant, which will then effectively feed back into the grid. I think there's some really significant opportunities there, and I think EVs will be attractive. But also, you asked the question, are EVs at risk? Well, Jaguar Land Rover has I don't think I'm betraying the secrets. They have a 7-year investment plan. So the plan that they've got to meet automotive demand in 2032, those decisions are being taken now, and that investment is happening. So they are committed. The key aspect of that, though, is making sure we get that gigafactory, because obviously, given the size of the vehicle, the battery, you have the battery, then you have to transport it to the car, and the further away it is, the more costly it is, and they're heavy things. They're very significant. It's a very significant cost. So.
Can I just say also the government's committed to phasing out diesel and petrol.
Precisely.
In the long term.
Precisely, which is why JLR are now investing, right? So they are constantly briefing. So and I'll just finish on this. I had a briefing from them. I've got the Castle Bromwich plant where there was this headline about a year ago, I think, talking about senior management being it was a significant reduction in headcount. Actually, let me correct myself. It was a significant reallocation of headcount, because what they then said was, actually, we're going to move them on to EV production, etc. So, the investment is going in now for that EV production. But of course, people may well, like yourself, like I asked, well, where's the cost efficiency going to be if the diesel becomes more competitive, for example? But I think 7 years down the line, we'll be in a much more different place in terms of energy costs. We just have to get people through the next 6 to 12 months.
Great, thanks so much, Saqib. And then I'm conscious that we've not answered the smart meter challenges in rural areas. So if I come to you, Dan, on that, and then I'm keen to get a couple more batches of questions. I think we'll leave it there. But yeah, Dan, if you want to.
So there were quite a few issues between Saqib and the local councillor. Didn't say your name, sir, but how do you do? So security, Saqib. I don't know whether it will reassure your mother, but GCHQ have given their endorsement to the security measures within the network that sits behind smart meters. I find that reassuring. On regionality, there are challenges. There's no question about that. The intention is, by the end of the smart meter rollout at the end of 2025, that more than 90% of homes will be covered. Part of the issue that the rollout has found is that because most meters exist inside people's homes, there are 27 different housing archetypes, as it turns out, in the UK, many old, and that is compounded often by your geographic location. There are problems. They're constantly being worked through, and in the end, near close to 100% of people will be able to have a smart meter, and certainly above 90%. Functionality, I mean, most people do use their in-home display, and most people do get a saving from doing that. I obviously don't know about your energy habits, and the product you know, 2/3 of people would recommend a smart meter from their experience to their friends and their family. That's quite high in the world of consumer goods. In terms of the smartness, the smartness exists, you know, partly for the end user. You don't agree with that, fair enough. But partly, as I was saying in my opening remarks, the benefits for the system. And when those two things come together is when this world of innovation that I tried to give a bit of a window on, and other panelists have too, the innovation in products and services that will be enabled by a combination of the data from smart meters plus the services that are offered by your energy supplier with AI and machine learning, and the consumer products that you may or may not purchase, your smart appliances, your EV. And then finally on language, I do agree with you completely on language. And one of the things I talk to energy suppliers a lot about, most consumers don't understand the language that is basically used in the industry. So people don't know what renewables are really, but they know what wind...
One quick example of the language was the expression come in, come out, which is consumer unit something, but without being very coarse, it had other annotations.
Yes, I've never come across that. But people, for example, people don't know what renewables are. People don't know what net zero means. They understand what fighting climate change means, and they understand what wind and solar are, because they can see panels and they can see wind turbines. So I think that is a big, big challenge for the whole industry to be better at communicating with consumers.
Great. I'm going to try and take a couple more batches of questions if I can. So short questions and short answers are what we're looking for. Yes, Richard, isn't it? I think, yeah.
Thank you. Richard Clare, leader, Wiltshire Council. When I'm looking at building zero carbon homes in council housing and council housing retrofit, we got jolly excited with some of the technologies that people were looking at and offering about connection to phones and monitoring usage and switching heating on and off automatically. And then we looked at A, rurality, and then B, the complexity of the poorer residents who are in social housing having a very diverse range of phones and not consistent range of phones. And then also there was the question about security of those kind of systems, and the fact that as a landlord we felt that there was a risk in terms of that being hacked. Yet they're the people we need to be getting the most benefit from. So when are we going to see some single sort of market leaders in this field that will, and how do we make sure that that is adapted to those who need support most, our poorer tenants, those in social affordable housing?
Great. Lindsay, do you want to pass it? Yep, I do that.
I had a smart meter many years ago, and when they were new, and it was of great advantage. Then I changed my supplier, and they couldn't take it over. So it's just sat in the cupboard, not being used. Has that changed?
Yep. And then one more gentleman at the back there with his hand up.
Thank you very much, Peter Kerner-Ford from Viatech Associates. Two quick questions. Number one, the more serious one. The second one, less so serious at the moment. Number one, how do we regulate bias? And who do we regulate that in the favor of, the industry or the consumer? And this relates to the algorithms that are used within AI. And number two, if and when we do get a true AI, and it exists, and it switches off electricity in Cumbria, because Manchester needs it, what do we do then?
Can I come to you, Laura, for that last question on regulation, who it's for and who it's by?
Yeah. So in our Digitalisation Taskforce report, we said that we needed a governance body for all energy algorithms, and that there needed to be an element of transparency of these algorithms, because actually there is most certainly I mean, picking up on the gentleman about the language that's used, etc. I mean, this whole sector is absolutely desperate for you to become a heating engineer or an electrical engineer. I mean, that's really what it wants you to be. And then you can fit into their box, right? This has to be absolutely turned the other way round. So this has to be serving the consumer. And there is a third so-called important factor, and that is the system. Because if you end up with a whole load of EV cars charging all at the same time, you will break the system in certain places. So there's what I would call system resilience and service to consumers. And that's where the algorithm bias, and it should be a bias, should lie. The industry then, but it is all around that governance piece. Could I just add one other point? And that is that this is becoming a much, much more complex system. And I'm now talking very much to energy companies and saying to them, you know, you are totally and utterly interdependent on the communication sector. And that comms and energy are becoming one infrastructure. And if they're not planned together, if they're not understood. So there was a little bit of an issue that happened in London a couple of weeks ago. All these EV cars were meant to charge at 3 o'clock in the morning, off-peak. Suddenly everybody plugged in, and this company saw that they all charged as they plugged in at 6 o'clock in the evening. It doesn't matter today, because we don't have enough of them. But when we do, what had happened was the 4G network had gone down in that area. Nothing to do with the energy company, nothing to do with the algorithm. And so we're going to have to start, and we're really pushing Ofgem and Ofcom to work much more collectively on our energy and comms resilience as one infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Saqib, I think you wanted to come in on that as well, and then I'll turn to Dan. Yeah,
just very quickly, I think, like it's just been said, I think the bias, there will always be bias in AI and technology. There's a human element when you're coding and doing algorithms and all those kind of things. And for me, the bias always has to be pro the consumer. The only thing I really wanted to say was, and it probably relates to some of the previous questions, in recent months, or maybe longer, I've been increasingly concerned that our regulators aren't quite putting the consumer first. And I think there's a big debate to be had about what that looks like. Now, the question around AI, the governance structure, I mean, I think that's going to be one of the biggest questions of our time, really, right? Because it's not just about climate change and net zero. It goes across beyond smart vehicles. It will permeate through every aspect of our life. And the question then will be, are Ofgem, Ofwat, whatever the regulator is, and instinctively I'm against, as a Conservative, we're wanting lots of quangos and whatnot, but having a regulator, are they fit for purpose? And I think that is going to be, you can probably guess where I'm going with this, but I think that is the debate. And to be honest, they're going to have to be fit for purpose because, if you've got instances that you've just spoken about, we're going to have to be in a situation where the consumer has their rights protected and then making sure that there's sufficient investment going in. So, watch this space, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then finally, Dan, do you want to pick up on the point about, defunct smart meters and also Richard's question as well about retrofitting social homes and the market leaders in some of these technologies that can help with low-income households?
I can certainly resume my consumer help desk services on the first, which is you've got a SMETS 1 meter. There were, unfortunately, a minority. There are all meters being installed now. SMETS 2, first generation meters. A small minority of them did stop working when you switch supplier. That's all being fixed. If your meter obviously hasn't been updated yet, but what's happening behind the scenes is that the DCC, the company operating the network, they are remotely upgrading all meters of which that is true, and they should start working, without you even having to do anything. And that program of work is well underway and should be complete within the next year.
Great, and let's do one final batch of questions. I'm just going to take a couple, and then I'll also invite everyone to do closing remarks as well. Yes, the gentleman there.
I don't know if you've heard, but Labour have been doing rather well in the polls recently, and they rather like nationalising things. Does that have any bearing on this discussion on data, AI and security at all?
Yep, good question. The gentleman there in the Grey shirt.
Hi, Kevin Zanneman from the Tony Blair Institute. I have a question for you, Laura. So Pierre was mentioning the EU AI Act and that, we'll have a risk-based approach. So we'll regulate AI saying we want to concentrate our regulation efforts on the top risk AI applications and we're not going to bother with the low risk ones. The UK seems to going to go for a sectoral approach of AI regulation. Like what do you think is best suited to, essentially regulate AI? Thank you.
Great. Well, let's wrap up the audience questions there. I'll go to Laura first to pick up on that question about regulation of AI and whether the sectoral approach is better as opposed to the EU approach. And any final comments as well, but keep it brief because we've not got long.
Absolutely. I think it's a really interesting point, and actually picking up on your point about regulation, is that all of these infrastructures are actually starting to conflate. So the idea that you can say that energy is merely the energy sector that we know today, isn't it mobility, isn't it also housing regulation, isn't it the interaction between all these different things? So I would say that AI regulation needs umbrella, cross-economy, economy-wide, that actually just becomes fundamental. Now, you might then end up with some different sectors looking at different levels of resilience required, security issues, etc. But that should be the tailoring of a much bigger set of principles, and we very much call for that and hope that that will come through.
Saqib, I'll come to you next to that, maybe pick up on the political point as the Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party for Business. Nationalisation surely bad for investment in these new technologies.
Yeah, to answer your question, I have noticed the polls, but actually, the reality is that I'd probably refer you to what I said at the start, all right? We have to make these arguments out there. We cannot be distracted by polls here. We can't be distracted by polls in the short term in the sense that, things change or whatnot, but we have to recognise that there are competing interests. There are, the concerns of people in terms of what their, daily, monthly costs are, but also our kind of imperative to deliver on, a free market solution to dealing with the challenges of our time. So achieving net zero, climate change, and we do need to take people with us, as I said at the start. We do need to take consumers with us, and we need people to have buy-in to that. And you'll know you're winning when the same people that whoever that person is starting to repeat those things back to you. So it's a really, really important question because that's exactly where the battle lines are going to be drawn. And I'll just finish with this. I saw a tweet where apparently Labour were putting out leaflets that were green coloured and taking the Green Party branding. I think I heard it on Radio 4, right? We are way beyond that, right? We have got good substantive arguments, so we have to take that to the doorstep and make sure people are with us.
Great, thanks, Saqib.
Absolutely.
Dan, closing remarks and maybe pick up on the regulation point as well if it's of interest.
Well, coming back to the theme of the event about AI, I suppose I completely agree with Laura's observations about how it's quite a supply-focused industry, and I think ways in which the industry could become more consumer-focused would be greatly to the benefit of the industry. And as far as AI, I just observed that the two biggest companies in the world are partly the biggest companies in the world, Apple and Amazon, because they're doing an absolutely fantastic job of marrying fantastic technology with brilliant end-user experiences. And it's those two things together that will, I think, if got right, be an amazing future for the energy system, even though that seems, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to create it.
And Pierre, final comments to wrap us up?
Yeah, no, for sure. Just to pick up on your comments, sir, I think a good framework to adopt when looking to regulate in this area is probably the one that the government's already taken with the age-appropriate design code when it comes to children's data privacy, and also the one that they're building with the online safety bill, which is safety by design. And that basically means that if you build a system, in this case, which promotes content based on artificial intelligence, algorithms feeding you content based on what it thinks you will prefer to see or not, then you are responsible to a degree for what appears through that system. And so I think sort of transposing that in a way to this, in general for the regulation of AI is probably quite a good starting place. The other point you were saying, I think about sort of the difficulties between transferring from one smart meter to another originally. just on that point, the government is currently drafting legislation called the Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Rights Bill. And in that, it is looking at things, measures, for example, such as data portability. And that will be, for example, to facilitate the transfer of your data, if you choose so, from one system to another. And again, that's something that potentially I think could be transposed to this area. And lastly, I mean, if we're going to, that also though relies on, again, the idea of decentralizing all of this and giving you much more ownership of your data. It would be the complete opposite, for example, of nationalizing things, because it would take things, if anything, even less out of the government's hands and into yours directly, I think. And I think that's a pretty good conservative way to look at things.
Great. No, thank you very much. That's a great point to end on. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. We've got into some of the weeds of regulation. We've talked about some of the exciting technologies that are out there in terms that are going to help us save money on energy bills. We've troubleshooted some people's problems with their smart meters. So, yeah, that's available for more questions on those later, I'm sure. But, yeah, I wanted to thank all of our speakers for their contributions and insights on today's panel. I'd like to thank you and the audience for joining us. I'd like to thank our sponsor again, Smart Energy GB, for making this possible. A couple of quick plugs for Sen before we go. We're doing 21 events across 3 days at Party Conference. We've got leaflets on your chairs, so do stick around for our next events in this room. Lots more exciting policy issues that we're going to be covering. And do sign up as a Sen supporter or a councillor as well if you haven't already via our website. It's free. You get lots of great benefits. So, yeah, final plug from me. Thank you very much again, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.